This is Troy Hawk, and this video will show you how you can create a layout for your website using divs. You should first create a prototype of your website by either drawing it or using a program such as Fireworks. Once you have a prototype, you can create divs on your website to hold the content. The layout that I discuss here is created within a 960 grid system layout. In this layout, I have created various options to hold content. So if we look up top here, we have a full column which could be used for a header, then another full column which could be used for navigation, depending on what you plan to do with your particular layout. But all of the options here are something that you can consider when choosing. Here we have a 1/2 column layout, a 1/2 column div. All of these that we see here are divs, so div tags, and we'll take a look at the code in just a minute. But again, the full column div here, the full column for a navigation if you plan to use it. The spacing in between each div is a margin that is set through CSS, and we'll take a look at the CSS or cascade style sheet for this as well. But when we look at each row, we have enough divs to fill up the whole row. So 1/2 column here and then 1/2 column there for this third row, if that's something you want to use. But next one, we have a 2/3 column and a 1/3. So mathematically, when you're creating the columns, it'll have to work out. But I'll show you what we used for this here. 1/3 column here, another 1/3 column, and a 1/3 column. So again, mathematically it has to work out. 1/4 column, another 4th column, another 4th column, and so on here. So all of these are divs and options for your layout that you may consider. So before you even get to this point, you should have already considered your layout through a prototype that you have created. When we look at this row here, we have a 1/4 column, a 1/2 column, and another 1/4 column. So again, mathematically is working out. The 1/5 columns here in the last row. So depending on what you have drawn as your prototype to create your website, you would consider what type of divs you want to use. Then of course, these aren't the only ones here. You can also create your own more customized ones as well, as long as it all works out mathematically. Now let's take a look at the code for the div layouts here. Well, again, this uses cascade style sheets to format everything here, and we'll take a look at the CSS file in just a minute. But from looking at the code, the full column, we'll click on this so that we can see this here. The full column, we set a class equal to full column so that we can use it in CSS. So in this case, CSS formats the margin and such. But generally, when we want to use a header with a navigation, in some cases you want to have that header and navigation connect with each other. So given that a margin is already set here, we'll go and change this margin here to be a 0 margin, bottom margin anyway, so that the two can fit together. Keep in mind that each one of the divs here have bottom margins, and all of the bottom margins are, well, currently they're set to 20 pixels. So in order for our header and our navigation divs to fit together or directly on top of each other, of course we would need to change the margin for the div there. So what I did is for the top div, I changed that with inline CSS to a margin bottom of 0 pixels. So now that's why we see that they fit together, and any content that you put inside of them will fit together. You can do that for any of the divs so that your content can fit the way that you want to use them. Now we can actually add some content in for the header. You could add a graphical file in here if you want, if you had graphics that you created and wanted to insert it in the file, but just make sure that it is the same width of whatever your header div is. And we'll look at the CSS to take a look at all of the widths for each one of the divs I have here, but mathematically it will have to work out where it can fit in well with it. So again, you could add content, but what I'll do is instead is I'll use background color and format the text here to make some changes in the header here. But before we do that, let's take a look at the code for the other divs that we have here. So the 1/2 column div, again, all of them have the same margin, which is set in the CSS file, the external CSS, of a bottom margin of 20 pixels. So unless you wanted to format this to be differently, then all of them will have the same margin. One thing to take notice of is that after each row is created, so for example the first row here, full column header, we reset. If we look at in the code, let's click on this so we can see. If we look at the code, we reset the flow, because right now everything is being told to flow to the left as long as it's on the same row. So after we complete one row of divs, we reset the flow so that we can restart a new row. So again, when we look at the code, and I'll open this up larger. Okay, so we have our first div here, which is the full column header. Now that's the only thing that's going to be on that row, so we reset the flow so that we can start a new row, which in this case would be the navigation. Again, the only thing that's going to be on that row is the navigation itself. And it's a full column, so we reset it again after that so that we can start a new row. Now in the next row, we saw from looking at the design view that this one has two columns in it, so or in other words, two divs on the same row. So we keep those two divs. These are 1/2 divs, and once we're done with that row, we reset it again to start something for start divs for the next row. You would do that for however many rows you have. So look at our next row here. We have a 2/3 row, a 2/3 div, 2/3 div, and a 1/3 div. And again, let me flip it to the view that we can see. So 2/3, and if I scroll over, you see the 1/3 here on this row. Once this row is completed with all the divs that we want, we reset again like we see here. And all of this is a float. It's a float to the left, and as long as you're talking about the same row, that is what allows the two or however many divs to stay on the same row. Now all of this is set in CSS, and we'll see the Cascade style sheet in just a minute. The next row had 3 divs. So the 3 divs were the 1/3 columns. And again, after we create those 3 divs on that row, we reset it if we're going to have another row after that. So again, as many as you have, as many divs as you have on one row, when you're at the end of those divs, you reset them so that you can possibly create another row of divs, so that each div can flow to the left. So looking at it in design view again, the first row up here, which is a full column, needs to be reset in order to create the next row, which is this full column navigation. Then going on, once we're ready to move on to the next row, we have to reset it before we do the next row. Once it's reset, then we have this row here. Again, everything is flowing to the left, and all of that is specified in CSS, which we will see. The next row, again, before this next row is created, it will have to be reset so that these columns don't try to flow to the left on the previous row. Now, before we add any content, let's take a look at the CSS. This web page uses an external CSS file, and we will look at that. Here we can see that the link is referring to a particular CSS file. In the CSS file, we set the column sizes and the column margin and float. So column sizes, well, we saw a variety of sizes there. Now you will have to determine what's going to work on your website based on your prototype or your initial drawing or design of the website. But for this particular one, I had a 1/4 column. So a 1/4 column, I set that to 220 pixels in width. A 1/3 column, I set as a 300 pixel width, and a 1/5 column as a 172 pixel width. Now this website or this web page is using a 960 layout or 960 grid system layout. So we want to consider what our margins are when we're considering creating the actual divs themselves, the width for the divs. So as we can see here, a full column div is 940 pixels. Well, you may say, well, why 940 if you're using a 960 width grid system? Well, again, we have to consider the margins. So our margins for this particular web page uses a left margin of 10 pixels, so that would get you up to 950 if we're talking about the full column, and then a right margin of 10 pixels, which will, once we add those two margins together, will give us 960 in width for the web page. So you have to consider your margin there when you are determining the size of your the width of your divs. The bottom margins are, all of the divs have a bottom margin of 20 pixels. So of course, if you need to make changes in that, like we did for the header and navigation part of it, you can change that in inline CSS. But otherwise, all of the other divs have to consider the margins as well. So the left and right margin, so that the total of your divs that you have there, the width of the divs plus all of the margins on the left and right of the divs themselves, that it will add up to 960 pixels in width. We set a float as well, so our float is to the left. So again, that means that once you create one div, you want that next div that you create to float right. You want it to float to the left of it, not otherwise it will go right below it and be on another row. But once we create the float to the left, that is what keeps them on the same row. And that is why we have to reset, or reset to start a new row. So down here, we created a reset, and the reset is just telling it to clear the left float so that you can create a new line or a new row of divs. So this has to be done, otherwise the divs will continue to float to the left and may be on the same and try to move to the same row as the previous divs that you had. So you have to clear the float out and then start a new row from there. So each row, once you've created the whole row, you clear it afterwards, so that if you decide that you need another row, it can start on that new line. Just to take a quick look at the other columns, we have again the 1/5 column, which is 172 pixels, the 1/2 column, which is 460 pixels, 2/3 column at 620 pixels, and so on. We have to make sure that mathematically, whatever you decide you're going to use there, that again it works out accordingly to 960 pixels across and fits well within those pages, those divs. This is a very simple layout. So now we can go and take a look at how to add content to these divs based on your prototype or your drawing of your website. For this first row, I'm just going to change the background color and add some style to the text. What I've done so far is added a background color to this first div here. So the background color, and I changed the height on the div as well. So here, this height, I changed it to 60 pixels. Now I've added some padding to this header so that it won't be so flush to the left. I've added 10 pixels of padding, so that's 10 around each side, meaning that it stretched my the div out more in both width and height. So we have to consider that with the margins that we set as well. So given that now the width is 10 out on the left and 10 more on the right, we can reduce the actual width of the div so that we can fit it right into B960. So 10 on the left, 10 on the right, that's 20 total. So we can reduce the width to 940 of this. Excuse me, we can set the width 20 pixels less to 920 for this full column that we're using here. So let's go to here and do that. So by setting it 20 pixels less, we can see that now the div fits. Everything is still aligned properly on the left and the right here. So let's take a look at some of the styling that I've done in the div for the header here. Well, again, the background color was set. The width had to be changed because of the padding that was added. I changed the font style or the font family to Arial, so that's another thing there. And so all of this was done within inline CSS within the div here, the style. The other thing that I've done was added the header 1 to the wording that was in here, so that we get some formatting of the text. So those are the things that I've done in there. And now you can see I've added some styling to the navigation. It's just a basic text navigation here. So take a look at what I've done. Well, I've changed the background color through style, so to the black color that we see. I've also changed the height just to make it a little larger. So the height at 30 pixels. The text color was changed as well in order to be seen on the black background. And I've added some padding to it as well, so it won't be so flush to either the top left or the top left or the bottom. The bottom padding was added in as well. The width I changed because of the padding that was added on both the left and right. So with 10 pixels total, 5 on the left and 5 on the right, I subtracted that from the 940 width that we've set for the full the full div. And now just some text links here. So text that I typed in for navlink 1, navlink 2, navlink 3, and I put 5 spaces between each one of them. So it's just going to be a basic navigation and a basic header there. On the next column, where I have the 1/2 column, I have a image that I'm going to insert there. So I'll just get rid of the words. So here's the image that I inserted into that 1/2 div. I edited this image to be exactly the same width of the div itself. So 460 is the width of the div, and the image, I edited this to be exactly that width as well. We can change the width of the other, well, actually the height of the other 1/2 column on this row to be the same height as this, so that way we can insert content accordingly. So since the width or the height of this image that I inserted is 270, I can also go ahead and change the height of this div to match it. Using inline CSS, we can see now that the height of this div has been changed to 270 pixels to match the height where I inserted the image. And now we can just insert some content in this div. So in this div, I've done a couple of things here. I've added some padding to keep the text from being so close or flush to the left or right or top. So I've added left padding 5 pixels, right padding 5 pixels, and with that in mind, I had to also reduce the width to compensate for the padding that I've added. So remember 460 was the normal size, so with the two sides 5 pixels, 5 pixels, total of 10 pixels, I had to subtract that from the width, giving me 450 pixels. And the background color I've added also, which was the black background color here. And the text color, I've added some text color in there as well. And those are the things that I've done to format and add content to this div here. So as you can see, the look of the website is coming along nicely here. And that's how you would add content to the other parts that you whatever other divs that you selected that fits within your design. That is how you will add content to those. I'll just change the color of some of these just so you'll see how and then I'll open it up in a browser so that you'll be able to see how it looks from that point of view. So here's some background color that I've added to this other 2/3 div and the 1/3 div. And you know, of course, you can place whatever content you want in there. One other last thing that I want to talk about is the footer. If you're going to use a footer, most likely it'll be a full column footer. So you can insert a footer the same way, change the background color, or add the images of the footer that you have if you plan on using images. Again, any of these let me switch to design view here. Here's design view, where actually this is a browser view here, where we can see how everything comes together. You have your full column, your navigation here, and remember we set the bottom margin for the header to be 0, so that way they are right on top of each other. You can change any of these margins as long as you compensate through the width and make it look the way that you want it to on your particular website. But that's how you go about using divs to add content to your web page. Hope you enjoyed this video, and check back for some other videos soon at webdevelopmentclass.net or on Facebook, Web Development Class.